That we have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous. Even it gets.
So hold on, are you the person who understands the officially codified doctrine of Islam? You're the interpreter of that, so you can say, well, this is...
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So you're saying if I criticize you're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing. That if you're critical of something...
Well, it's not a real thing when we do it.
Right.
Well, no,
it really isn't.
I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people. And that's a problem.
Big of you.
But
why are you so hostile about this?
It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so nuts.
It's like saying those stateless, shifty Jew.
You're not listening to what
we
are saying.
You guys are saying if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles like freedom of speech, like we are endowed by our forefathers with inalienable rights, like all men are created equal.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas.
So first off, I think it's gross, it's racist should be your Twitter bio. Have you considered putting it there?
Yeah, people have been just throwing that at me on Twitter ever since.
Yeah,
it's a bit of a meme.
Yeah, so what I want to start with is, because I think there's obviously a ton we can talk about the fallout of this, and we'll get to that, but I want to talk about actually the specifics of what happened there.
Right.
Did you expect, because usually when they bring on the guest that sits on Bill's side of the table, usually it's for a one-on-one with Bill and sort of a casual conversation, the panel doesn't really jump in. Did you expect that whole thing to explode the way that it did?
No, not at all. I was selling a book on meditation at that moment. I was talking, and that's about 60 seconds into the exchange.
Yeah.
And so initially it starts with, how can an atheist be spiritual? And we're talking along those lines. And I said something slightly derogatory about the New Age. And Ben jumped into that space and was at my throat about Islam hadn't even come up. So he clearly was poised to do that. And yeah, that's considered a protected interview. Everyone on the panel knows they're not supposed to jump in.
What do you think was going on with Ben?
Well, apart from him possibly being on steroids for his Batman role, I don't know. I just think he clearly I think he had no idea who I was, really, but someone had given him a paragraph, a bio of me, and had more or less told him that, I'm a bigot who's intolerant of Muslims, and, he really should, take a whack at me on that topic.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I think I was a little slow to appreciate how hostile he was, because I wasn't just looking at him. I was actually looking at Nick Kristof, who I have actually collided with on this topic, and who my remarks were more pitched to, I think more appropriately pitched to, because Nick really deals with especially women's rights issues in the developing world to a unique degree. So I had a bit of a bone to pick with Nick, and there were other, Michael Steele was on the panel, and so my attention was split, and so I wasn't just kind of at the corner of my consciousness I was understanding that there was a level of hostility here that I didn't really expect or know how to interpret.
The Ben Affleck, whom I didn't know, but I understand he's Batman, was on Bill Maher's show with Sam Harris, and he vigorously and rather vitriolically attacked Sam, accusing him of racism because Sam has criticized Islam. And that's a very easy thing to do, but it's a very silly, superficial thing to do because, of course, Islam is not a race. And this is an enormously widespread misconception that anybody who criticizes Islam is being religious. I would say that if you can convert to it or apostatize out of it, then it's not a race. Okay? So it's nonsense to criticize people like Sam Harris and indeed me who go after the extremes that Islam can deliver as racism. And I thought it was a rather disgraceful exhibition of bigotry on Ben Affleck's part. And there's a kind of condescension about it, actually, as well, because the horrific things that are done in the Islamic world, not of course by all Muslims, very far from it, but the horrific things that are done to gay people, to women, stoning women to death for the crime of being raped, throwing acid in their face for the crime of refusing to marry a cousin, refusing to let them drive cars, refusing to let them leave the house unless in the company of a male relative. These horrific things, misogynistic things, are, it's almost as though one's saying, you brown people, we don't hold you to the same standards of non-misogyny as we hold ourselves. Now, isn't that a patronizing and condescending thing to do, to use a different standard, to say, we don't criticize you because because misogyny is part of your culture? And that, I think, is what Ben Affleck was doing, among other things. It was a disagreeable episode. I thought Sam handled it very well. I think it was quite unexpected. I don't think that Ben Affleck had actually read anything that Sam had written. I think he probably had been briefed by somebody who said, Sam Harris is a racist Islamophobe, go after him. That would be what I suspect.
So talking about knowing how to interpret it, like, it's a little different if Nick Kristof or some author or a philosopher had immediately jumped out at you like that. I think you perhaps would have dealt with it in one way. But when I mean, this is an A-list Hollywood star, this is Batman, jumps at you that way, did that throw you off in a way? I mean, you were cool and collected there, but just having to deal with someone at that level, it's like a different ball game, you know? Yeah,
well, it's hard to interrupt a movie star who doesn't want to be interrupted. So at a certain point, you know, if Bill's not going to cut him off, I can't cut him off. So trying to get a word in edgewise is a challenge there. But I mean, the irony is the sentence he was reacting to, the sentence where I say everyone conflates criticism of Islam, a set of ideas, with bigotry against Muslims as people. He no sooner were those words uttered than he demonstrated my thesis with every subsequent statement, and it was just impossible to get that mirror bent, you know, close enough toward his face so that he could recognize what he was doing. Right. So he literally, for the remainder of the 12 minutes, I mean, he continually and repeatedly proved your theory. And then it continued for an hour in the green room afterwards, and it was by no means resolved. Yeah, and clearly hasn't been resolved since. All right, so I don't want to focus too much on that specifically, but I just want to talk about when someone throws, you know, he throws this, it's gross, it's racist. Mm-hmm. Suddenly I noticed that the next day, the onus was on you and Bill Maher, and a little more to Bill, I think, to prove that you weren't racist. Right. I've been a big fan of Bill's for a long time. I've never heard anyone call him racist, ever, before. Yeah. But suddenly, the next day, on all the websites, it was Ben Affleck calls Sam Harris and Bill Maher racist. Is Bill Maher racist? Is Sam Harris racist? How does that feel in that moment of the discussion when someone throws that gauntlet down? Because you're used to debating people with ideas, not just words. Well, it's very dispiriting because it's almost guaranteed to convince half the audience. This is the first thing I said to Ben afterwards in the green room. I said, you realize just calling us racist convinced half the people listening and watching that we're racist. I mean, just using that word is enough for people. So, and people just assume where there's smoke, there's fire. They can't figure out what anyone is actually saying. Their attention span is so truncated that using words like that, again, just convinces fully half the audience. And the most depressing thing in the aftermath of this was to see the outpouring, the celebration of, disproportionately in the Muslim community on social media, from people who thought that he had just mopped the floor with us, that he had exposed our racism for all to see, and he had argued brilliantly, and he's just this white knight for the Muslim world. And I mean, it was so embarrassing because of course, he did none of that. He wasn't making any sense. He wasn't listening to what we were actually saying, and he was simply, calling us names, very loaded names, and it works for people who want to perceive the conversation along those lines. Was this meme or this idea of you as a racist, was that even out there? Because now
I see it in the dialogue all the time, but I had never heard of it. And to be 100% honest with you, I had sort of ancillarily knew your work. I'm not even sure if I was following you on Twitter at the time. So I know a lot of people, when they're done with this, they're going to say, Ruben's just a Sam Harris fanboy and blah, 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 blah. But I didn't. I was watching that, and I thought, well, here's someone making some sense. And now Ben Affleck's just using the worst kind of language with him. But was that idea about you out there before this?
Well, yeah, I think Glenn Greenwald and a few other people had put it out there. So it was, I mean, it's a trope of politically correct liberal apology around criticism of Islam. So, I mean, this notion of Islamophobia, the idea that to single out Islam for any special attention as a set of doctrines or as a political reality in today's world is tantamount to, synonymous with, or covertly motivated by racist bigotry toward Arabs or brown-skinned people. And you know, there are many people like Glenn Greenwald who quite irresponsibly, you know, make that point again and again. And so, yeah, so Ben's, sort of, that was not the first time criticism of Islam has been conflated with racism. But I mean, it's such a crazy claim because, I mean, this has been pointed out again and again, and Bill's done this, but Islam is not a race. You know, it's a set of ideas. You can't convert away from a race. You can't convert to a race.
Well, if you're Rachel Dolezal, you can.
Yes, that's right. Yes, you can. One person can do that. Everything I say about Islam applies to white converts to the faith every bit as much as it does to Arabs or anyone born into it.
Sure.
In fact, even more so, because I mean, you've had, if you're 30 years old and not had this drummed into you on mother's knee, and with a full adult, you know, clear viewing of your life and all the opportunities available to you, you decide to convert to the most doctrinaire and repressive form of Islam, well then I have the most to say about you. You know, someone like, you know, Adam Gadon, who's, you know, I think he's now dead, but this guy from Orange County who joined Al-Qaeda, you know, I mean, and everything I say about Islam as a religion that, you know, is true. I've said some disparaging things about it as a set of ideas, and I've compared it unfavorably to Buddhism and Hinduism, which, you know, their adherents are for the most part not white like me. So the idea that racism that notions of race has anything to do with this is just